There's a weight you've been carrying that nobody asked you to hold, but somehow, somewhere along the way, it became yours. It settled into your chest, your shoulders, your thoughts. It's the quiet sense that if someone around you is unhappy, unsettled, or uncomfortable, it's somehow your job to fix it, to smooth it over, to make it better. You've felt this, haven't you? That automatic reflex when someone's mood shifts, when tension fills a room, when disappointment flickers across a face. Something inside you immediately begins calculating, scanning, problem-solving. What did I do? What can I say? How can I make this okay again? And maybe you've been doing this for so long that you don't even notice it anymore. It's just how you move through the world, anticipating needs before they're spoken. Reading emotional temperatures like a constant weather forecast. Adjusting yourself, your tone, your energy, to keep everyone around you comfortable, calm, content. But here's what most people don't understand about this pattern. It's not generosity. It's not kindness gone too far. It's something deeper, more complex, more tender than that. It's a survival strategy that learned to masquerade as love. And tonight we're going to explore what it means to feel responsible for everyone's happiness and what it costs you when you do. Now, dim those lights, get cozy, settle into your pillow and let yourself relax. Take a breath. You don't remember agreeing to this, but somewhere in the earliest chapters of your life a contract was written. Not in words, not explicitly, but in the quiet ways you learned what it meant to belong, to be valued, to be safe. Perhaps you were the child who learned that your parents' moods were fragile things, easily disrupted by your needs, your noise, your natural childhood intensity. Perhaps you discovered, without anyone ever saying it directly, that when you made things easier for the adults around you, the atmosphere softened, the tension dissolved, the sharp edges of their stress became smoother, and in those moments, you felt something powerful, not just approval, but relief. The relief of knowing that you could control something in an environment that often felt unpredictable. You could manage the emotional weather. You could be the one who kept everything steady. This contract didn't arrive with terms and conditions. There was no signature, no formal agreement. It formed in the space between what was said and what was felt, between what you needed and what you learned to suppress, between who you were and who you discovered you needed to be to keep the peace. Maybe it started with small things. You learned to read the room before speaking. You learned to gauge your mother's stress level before asking for what you wanted. You learned to stay quiet when your father came home exhausted. You learned to be the easy child, the one who didn't add to the burden, the one who somehow, miraculously, made things lighter instead of heavier. And what happened in those moments when you succeeded, when you managed to ease the tension, to brighten someone's mood, to make the atmosphere more breathable? You felt valuable. You felt needed. You felt like you had a purpose that was bigger than just being a child. You became the emotional thermostat, constantly adjusting the temperature of the household, making sure everyone stayed comfortable, making sure no one got too upset, too overwhelmed, too uncomfortable. This gave you a sense of control in a world that otherwise might have felt chaotic or unpredictable. If you could manage their emotions, you could manage your own safety. But here's what that early contract cost you. It cost you the freedom to be a child who didn't have to think about adult emotions. It cost you the ability to express your own needs without first calculating how they would affect everyone else. It cost you the simple, uncomplicated experience of being cared for without having to earn it through emotional labor. You learned, so early that you don't even remember learning it, that your job was to make other people feel better, that your worth was measured by how well you could manage the emotional ecosystem around you. That love was something you received not for simply existing, but for being helpful, useful, emotionally attuned and carefully calibrated to everyone else's needs. And so the pattern was set. A pattern that would follow you into every relationship, every friendship, every professional interaction, every casual encounter. A pattern where you automatically scanned for emotional distress and immediately moved to fix it. Where someone else's discomfort became your emergency. Where another person's unhappiness became your responsibility. This wasn't a conscious choice you made. It was a survival strategy that became so deeply embedded in your nervous system that it operates automatically, like breathing, like blinking, like any other involuntary response to the world around you. You've developed a skill that most people don't even know exists. A kind of emotional radar that scans every room you enter, every conversation you have, every interaction you navigate. You read micro-expressions like a language. The slight furrow of a brow, the barely perceptible shift in someone's tone, the way their smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. Most people miss these signals entirely, but you catch them all. And catching them means something. It means you feel responsible for them. When someone's face tightens, even slightly, your nervous system responds as if you've done something wrong, as if their discomfort is a problem you need to solve immediately. This isn't paranoia. This is a finely tuned sensitivity that developed because, at some point, other people's emotions determined your safety. When the adults around you were calm, you were safe. When they were upset, the world felt unstable. This radar never turns off. At a family gathering, you're tracking who seems left out of the conversation. At work, you notice when a colleague seems quieter than usual. With friends, you pick up on subtle shifts in energy that tell you someone isn't quite okay. Even with strangers, cashiers, servers, people you pass on the street, you're unconsciously monitoring their emotional state, adjusting your behavior to make sure you're not adding to anyone's stress or discomfort. You smile a little brighter when someone seems tired. You're extra polite when someone seems irritated. You go out of your way to be easy, pleasant, accommodating, because somewhere deep inside, you believe that other people's emotional states are somehow connected to your behavior, your presence, your existence. This sensitivity makes you incredibly attuned to others. People often describe you as thoughtful, considerate, empathetic. They appreciate how you seem to understand them without them having to explain. They value how you anticipate their needs, how you make them feel seen and heard. This attunement is a gift in many ways. It makes you a wonderful friend, a supportive partner, a valued colleague. But it also means you're carrying an enormous amount of data at all times. You're not just experiencing your own emotional reality, you're experiencing everyone else's too. You're processing their micro-expressions, their tone shifts, their energy, changes, their unspoken needs. Your nervous system is constantly working overtime, analysing, interpreting, responding to emotional information that most people don't even consciously register. And here's what happens over time. This constant scanning becomes exhausting in ways you can't always name. It's not a physical tiredness, though that's certainly present. It's a deeper depletion. The exhaustion of never being able to just be in a room without also managing the emotional temperature of that room. The weariness of never being able to relax fully because part of you is always on duty, always monitoring, always ready to step in if someone seems upset or uncomfortable. You can't watch a movie without noticing if your partner seems bored. You can't have dinner with friends without tracking whether everyone is enjoying themselves. You can't attend a meeting without sensing the unspoken tensions and automatically trying to smooth them over. This hypervigilance creates a particular kind of stress, because you're not just responding to real problems, you're responding to perceived problems, potential problems, problems that might not even exist except in your interpretation of someone's facial expression or tone of voice. Someone could be perfectly fine, just lost in thought, but you interpret their silence as upset. Someone could be tired from a long day, but you interpret their lower energy as disappointment in you. Someone could be processing their own emotions, but you interpret their distance as something you need to fix. And so you're constantly in motion, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to prevent or repair emotional situations that may not even require your intervention. There's a role some children take on without ever auditioning for it. It's not assigned officially. There's no conversation where someone sits you down and says, "You're going to be responsible for keeping everyone okay." But somehow, through 1,000 small moments, through watching and learning and adapting, you become the emotional stabilizer. Maybe you were the child who learned to read your parents' stress and respond by being easier, quieter, more helpful. Maybe you were the one who mediated between fighting parents, who comforted younger siblings, who sensed when someone needed reassurance and offered it before they even asked. Maybe you were the good kid, the responsible one, the one everyone could count on. And while that felt good in some ways, while it gave you a sense of purpose and value, it also taught you something problematic. It taught you that your worth was tied to other people's emotional states, that your job was to manage not just your own feelings, but everyone else's too. This role often develops in families where the emotional environment is unstable, unpredictable, or overwhelming. Maybe you had a parent who struggled with depression, and you learned to monitor their moods, trying to cheer them up, trying to be the light in their darkness. Maybe you had a parent with anxiety, and you learned to be calm and steady, to not add to their worry, to manage your own needs so quietly that you barely disturbed the air. Maybe your parents fought frequently, and you learned to be the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who distracted everyone with jokes or helpfulness or perfect behavior. Maybe you had a sibling with special needs, and you learned to be the easy child, the one who didn't require attention, who took care of themselves, who actually took care of others. Or perhaps the dynamics were more subtle. Maybe you just had parents who were stressed, overwhelmed by the demands of life, and you learned that the best way to be loved was to not add to their burden. You learned to be independent, self-sufficient, emotionally managed. You learned to handle your own problems without bothering anyone. You learned to comfort yourself when you were sad, to solve your own dilemmas when you were confused, to celebrate your own victories without expecting much fanfare. And in learning all of this, you also learned that your emotional needs were less important than everyone else's stability, that your job was to make life easier for others, not to require them to make life easier for you. This role gave you certain skills. You became incredibly intuitive about people's emotions. You developed a deep capacity for empathy. You learned how to read situations and respond appropriately. You became adaptable, flexible, attuned. These are valuable qualities, but they came at a cost. Because while you were busy developing the ability to manage everyone else's emotional world, you weren't learning how to honor your own. You weren't learning that your feelings mattered just as much as anyone else's. You weren't learning that your needs deserved attention and care. You weren't learning that relationships should be reciprocal, that care should flow in both directions, that you deserved to be held as much as you held others. And so you grew up with this fundamental imbalance in your understanding of relationships. You learned to give endlessly, but not how to receive. You learned to support others, but not how to ask for support. You learned to make space for everyone's emotions, but not how to take up space with your own. You learned to be the stabilizer, the caretaker, the one who keeps everything okay. And you learned to feel uncomfortable, almost guilty, when you weren't performing that role. Because that role became your identity. It became how you understood your value in the world. It became the lens through which you interpreted love, connection, and belonging. There's a beautiful thing called empathy, the ability to feel with someone, to sense their emotional landscape, to understand their experience without them having to explain it fully. But somewhere along the way, your empathy transformed into something else. Something psychologists call enmeshment. Instead of feeling with someone, while maintaining your own emotional boundaries, you began absorbing their feelings as if they were your own. Their sadness became your sadness. Their anxiety became your anxiety. Their disappointment became your failure. You lost the ability to distinguish between being compassionate towards someone's struggle and being responsible for fixing it. This is where empathy crosses a line, where healthy emotional attunement becomes emotional fusion, where you stop being a supportive presence and become an emotional caretaker, someone who believes that love means taking on the weight of everyone else's inner world, regardless of what it costs you. Enmeshment feels different than empathy, though the distinction can be hard to recognize when you're in it. Empathy allows you to understand someone's pain while still maintaining your own emotional equilibrium. You can feel compassion for their struggle without it destabilizing you. You can offer support without losing yourself in their experience. You can hold space for their emotions without absorbing them as your own. Empathy has boundaries. It recognizes where you end and the other person begins. It allows for connection without merger, for intimacy without loss of self. But enmeshment erases those boundaries. When you're enmeshed with someone, their emotional state directly determines yours. If they're anxious, you become anxious. If they're unhappy, you become responsible for making them happy. If they're struggling, you feel like you're failing. There's no separation between their experience and your response to it. You can't observe their pain from a place of compassionate distance. You're inside it with them, drowning in it, desperately trying to fix it so that you can both feel better. Because in enmeshment, their relief is your relief. Their happiness is your happiness. Their stability is your stability. This pattern often develops in childhood relationships, where boundaries were unclear or non-existent. Maybe you had a parent who relied on you for emotional support in ways that weren't age-appropriate. Maybe you became their confidant, their therapist, their emotional regulator. They would share their problems, their fears, their disappointments, and you would absorb all of it, trying to make them feel better, trying to solve issues that were far beyond your capacity or responsibility. Or maybe the enmeshment was more subtle. Maybe your parents' mood just determined the entire atmosphere of the house, and you learned that if you could manage their mood, you could manage your own sense of safety and well-being. As an adult, this enmeshment continues in your relationships. You choose partners whose emotional needs feel familiar, often people who are struggling in some way, people you believe you can help, people whose happiness becomes your project. You make friends with people who lean on you emotionally, who share their problems but rarely ask about yours, who depend on your stability to manage their own chaos. You gravitate toward people who need you because being needed feels like love, feels like purpose, feels like the only way you know how to connect. And in these relationships, you lose yourself. Your emotions become reactive rather than authentic. You're not feeling your own feelings. You're feeling your feelings about their feelings. You're not living your own life. You're managing everyone else's. The exhausting part of enmeshment is that it's constant. There's no off switch. Even when you're physically alone, you're emotionally preoccupied with other people's states. You're replaying conversations, analysing interactions, worrying about whether someone is upset with you, planning how to fix situations that might not even be problems. Your mind is never fully your own. It's always partially occupied with managing, anticipating, responding to other people's emotional realities. And this creates a life where you're never truly present with yourself because you're always elsewhere, emotionally entangled with everyone around you, unable to separate your well-being from theirs. Breaking enmeshment requires learning something that feels almost impossible at first, that you can care deeply about someone without absorbing their emotions, that you can be supportive without being responsible, that you can love someone and still maintain your own emotional boundaries. That compassion doesn't require self-abandonment. This learning is slow and uncomfortable because it goes against everything you've practiced for your entire life. But it's also essential. Because enmeshment isn't sustainable. It depletes you, exhausts you, erases you, and eventually something has to change. Your nervous system learned to be on constant alert, not for physical danger, but for emotional disruption. Even now, even in moments that should feel peaceful, there's a part of you that never fully relaxes. You're always scanning, always monitoring, always ready to step in if someone's mood shifts. At a dinner table, you notice who's quieter than usual. In a group conversation, you track who might feel left out. In a relationship, you anticipate needs before your partner even articulates them. This isn't conscious most of the time, it's automatic. A background process running constantly, like software you can't close. And while it makes you incredibly attuned to others, incredibly thoughtful and sensitive, it also exhausts you in ways you can't always name. Because hypervigilance isn't rest, it's a state of perpetual readiness, a belief that if you stop monitoring, if you stop managing, something will go wrong, and it will somehow be your fault. This hypervigilance has a physiological component that most people don't recognize. Your nervous system exists in what researchers like Stephen Porges would call a state of chronic activation. Your sympathetic nervous system, the part responsible for the fight or flight response, is constantly engaged at a low level, not enough to feel like panic or obvious anxiety, but enough to prevent you from ever truly settling into rest. Your body is perpetually prepared to respond to emotional threats, to manage interpersonal disruptions, to smooth over conflicts before they escalate. This state of readiness might feel normal to you because you've lived this way for so long, but it's taking a toll on your body and mind in ways you might not fully recognize. You might notice this activation in small ways. The difficulty you have falling asleep at night because your mind immediately begins reviewing the day, analyzing interactions, worrying about things you said or didn't say. The way your stomach tightens when you sense someone's mood shifting. The tension that lives permanently in your shoulders and neck. The physical manifestation of carrying emotional weight that isn't yours. The exhaustion that no amount of sleep seems to fully resolve because the tiredness isn't just physical. It's the fatigue of a nervous system that never gets to rest, that's always on duty, always monitoring for signs of emotional distress in others. This hypervigilance also affects how you experience the world. You can't simply enjoy a moment without also managing it. At a party, you're not just present with your own experience, you're tracking the room, noticing who seems uncomfortable, making sure everyone is included, smoothing over awkward moments, being the social glue that holds everything together. On vacation with family, you're not just relaxing, you're managing logistics, preventing conflicts, making sure everyone is happy with the plans, sacrificing your own preferences to keep the peace. Even in quiet moments with a partner, you're not just being together, You're monitoring their mood, checking in, making sure they're okay, ready to shift into caretaking mode the moment they seem anything less than content. What this means is that you rarely experience pure presence, pure being, pure rest, because presence requires letting go of control, letting go of responsibility for outcomes, letting go of the need to manage everyone's emotional experience, and that letting go feels dangerous to a nervous system that learned long ago that vigilance equals safety, that monitoring equals control, that if you stop paying attention, if you stop managing, something bad will happen. Maybe someone will get upset, maybe conflict will erupt, maybe someone will be disappointed, maybe, and this is the deepest fear, someone will leave. And so you stay alert, stay ready, stay responsible, believing that your constant vigilance is what keeps everything okay, not recognizing that this vigilance is also what keeps you from ever feeling truly at peace. The research on hypervigilance shows that it's not just exhausting, it's also distorting. When you're constantly scanning for problems, you start seeing problems that aren't there. Neutral expressions become signs of disapproval, silence becomes evidence of upset, someone's distraction becomes proof that they're disappointed in you. Your nervous system is so primed to detect emotional threats that it begins creating them, interpreting ambiguous situations as negative, assuming the worst, operating from a baseline of anxiety rather than trust. This creates a self-fulfilling cycle where your vigilance generates the very anxiety it's trying to prevent. And here's what makes this pattern so difficult to break. Your hypervigilance has been rewarded. It's made you valuable. People depend on your attunement, your thoughtfulness, your ability to anticipate needs. You've built relationships and identities around being the one who pays attention, who cares, who notices what others miss. To release the hypervigilance feels like releasing your value, your purpose, your way of ensuring that you matter to others. But the truth is, you can be caring and attuned without being hypervigilant. You can notice people's needs without feeling responsible for meeting all of them. You can be empathetic without sacrificing your own nervous system's need for rest and regulation. The challenge is learning to believe this, to trust that you can still be valuable, still be loved, still be connected even when you're not constantly monitoring and managing everyone's emotional state. Somewhere in your learning about relationships, a dangerous equation formed: love equals sacrifice, care equals depletion. Being good to someone means putting their needs before yours, always, without question, without limit. This belief didn't form maliciously. It came from watching, from absorbing the models of love around you, from the praise you received when you were selfless, from the discomfort you felt when you asserted your own needs. Over time, this equation became your operating system. You began measuring your love by how much of yourself you were willing to give up, how uncomfortable you were willing to be to make someone else comfortable, how much you could endure without complaining, how invisible you could make your own needs. And anyone who challenged this, anyone who suggested you should prioritize yourself sometimes, felt almost offensive. Because if love isn't sacrifice, then what is it? If you're not responsible for everyone's happiness, then what's your purpose? This equation gets reinforced in countless ways throughout life. You see it in movies and books where the most loving characters are the ones who sacrifice everything for others. You hear it in cultural messages about selflessness being the highest virtue. You experience it in religions and spiritual traditions that often equate holiness with self-denial and service. You receive it in the praise you get when you put others first and the subtle disapproval you sense when you prioritize yourself. All of these messages compound into a belief system that tells you love is measured by how much of yourself you're willing to erase. But here's what this equation misses. It misses the fundamental truth that sustainable love requires two whole people, not one person sacrificing themselves into nothingness for another. It misses that depletion doesn't create connection. Resentment does. It misses that when you constantly put others first, you're not actually being generous. You're teaching people that your needs don't matter, that you're fine being the one who gives while others receive, that the relationship doesn't need to be balanced because you don't require reciprocity. And they learn this lesson well. They learn to expect your sacrifice. They learn to depend on your selflessness. They learn that you'll always be there, always available, always willing to put yourself last. This creates relationships that feel increasingly one-sided. You give advice, support, time, energy, resources. You show up when people need you. You make sacrifices to accommodate their schedules, their preferences, their comfort. You suppress your own needs so as not to burden them. You hide your struggles so they don't have to worry. You perform endless emotional labor to keep everything smooth and harmonious. And what do you receive in return? Often very little. Not because people are necessarily selfish or uncaring, but because you've trained them to believe that you don't need anything, that you're fine, that you're the strong one, that your role is to give, not to receive. Over time, this dynamic erodes something essential. It erodes your sense of your own worth separate from what you do for others. It erodes your ability to recognize your own needs as valid and important. It erodes your capacity to ask for what you need without feeling selfish or demanding. It erodes the possibility of true intimacy, because intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires admitting that you're not always okay, that you need support, that you can't manage everything alone. But you've spent so long being the one who holds everyone else that the idea of being held yourself feels almost impossible. You don't know how to receive care without immediately trying to reciprocate. You don't know how to be the one who's struggling without minimizing it. You don't know how to let someone else be strong for you without feeling like a burden. The most painful part of this equation is how it shapes your internal experience, because you're not just sacrificing your needs in action, you're sacrificing them in your own mind. You've learned to not even recognize what you need because recognizing needs feels dangerous, indulgent, selfish. So you suppress them before they fully form. You talk yourself out of wanting things. You convince yourself that you're fine with whatever makes everyone else happy. You become so skilled at self-denial that you genuinely lose touch with your own preferences, desires, needs. You become a person who exists primarily in relation to others, whose sense of self is almost entirely defined by what you do for people, how you make them feel, how useful you are. And this is a profound loss. A loss of self that happens so gradually you don't even realize it's happening, until one day you wake up and realize you don't know who you are outside of being needed. You look fine, you function well, you show up, you're reliable, you're helpful, you're present. But underneath the capable exterior is a weariness that runs deeper than tiredness. It's the exhaustion of emotional labor that never ends, of caring for everyone's feelings while neglecting your own, of holding space for others while shrinking your own space, of performing emotional availability while feeling completely depleted inside. This exhaustion isn't the kind that sleep fixes. It's not about physical tiredness. It's the bone-deep fatigue of living, as if you're responsible for the emotional well-being of everyone around you, of never being able to relax because someone might need something, of feeling guilty for resting because there's always someone who could use your help, of carrying weights that were never yours to carry in the first place. And the hardest part, you can't explain this exhaustion to most people because they see what you do, but they don't see the internal cost of doing it. This exhaustion manifests in ways that are easy to miss or misinterpret. Maybe it's the heaviness you feel when you wake up, even after a full night's sleep, the sense that the day ahead feels like too much before it's even begun. Maybe it's the way social interactions, even with people you love, start to feel draining rather than energizing. The way you need extensive alone time to recover from being around others, not because you don't care about them, but because being around them requires so much emotional output. Maybe it's the difficulty you have making decisions, even small ones, because your decision-making energy is already depleted from constantly calculating what everyone else needs and wants. Or maybe the exhaustion shows up as a kind of numbness. You used to feel things deeply, but now there's a flatness to your emotional experience. Joy doesn't quite reach you anymore. Excitement feels muted. Even sadness feels distant, as if you're watching your emotions from behind glass rather than experiencing them directly. This numbness isn't depression, though it can look like it. It's protective. It's your psyche's way of managing overwhelming levels of emotional input by shutting down your own emotional system. When you're constantly processing everyone else's feelings, there's no bandwidth left for your own, so they get suppressed, minimized, numbed out. The exhaustion also affects your body in tangible ways. Your immune system weakens because chronic stress suppresses immune function. You get sick more often, take longer to recover. You might experience digestive issues, headaches, chronic pain, mysterious symptoms that doctors can't quite explain. Your body is trying to tell you something, that you're overextended, that you're carrying too much, that the emotional labor you're performing has a physical cost. But you've learned to override your body's signals, to push through, to keep functioning no matter what. You take pain relievers for the headaches, antacids for the stomach problems, caffeine for the fatigue, maybe sleeping pills when the racing thoughts won't let you rest. You manage the symptoms but never address the cause, because addressing the cause would mean changing fundamental patterns, setting boundaries, prioritizing yourself. And that feels impossible. There's also a particular loneliness to this exhaustion. You're surrounded by people. You have relationships, connections. But despite being everyone's support system, despite being the person everyone turns to, you feel profoundly alone in your experience. Because who supports you? Who do you turn to when you're struggling? You've built relationships where you're the giver, the helper, the strong one. You don't know how to be the one who needs help. You don't know how to admit you're tired, you're overwhelmed, you're struggling under the weight of responsibility you've taken on. And even when you try to express it, people often don't understand. They see you as capable, together, fine. They can't see the exhaustion beneath the surface because you've gotten so good at hiding it. This exhaustion eventually reaches a point where something has to change. Maybe it's a health crisis that forces you to slow down. Maybe it's a relationship ending because you finally can't keep giving. Maybe it's a moment of complete breakdown where the facade cracks and you can't pretend anymore. Maybe it's just the slow, creeping realization that you can't continue living this way, that something essential is being lost, that the cost of being responsible for everyone's happiness is becoming too high to bear. Whatever the catalyst, the exhaustion becomes impossible to ignore, and that's when the possibility of change finally emerges. Not because you suddenly become strong enough to change, but because you finally become tired enough to stop. When you finally try to set a boundary, when you finally say no, or express a need or prioritize yourself in some small way, the guilt arrives immediately. It's not subtle, it's visceral, physical, overwhelming. Your chest tightens, your mind floods with worry. Did I hurt them? Are they upset? Did I do something wrong? Am I being selfish? The guilt is so intense that it often feels easier to just give in, to go back to taking care of everyone else, to abandon the boundary before it's even fully established. This guilt isn't random, it's deeply conditioned. It's the emotional alarm system that developed when you learned that your needs disrupted other people's comfort, when asserting yourself meant tension, disappointment, or withdrawal of love. So now, even healthy boundaries feel like betrayals, even reasonable limits feel like cruelty. Even basic self-care feels like abandoning your responsibility to keep everyone okay. And this keeps you trapped in a pattern where everyone else's happiness takes priority and your own well-being becomes negotiable. The guilt that accompanies boundary setting is one of the most difficult aspects of this pattern to overcome, because it doesn't feel like an overreaction, it feels completely justified. When you say no to someone, when you can't help them this time, when you need to prioritize your own needs, the guilt tells you that you're being selfish, unkind, uncaring. It tells you that you're letting people down, that you're not being the person they need you to be, that you're failing in your fundamental responsibility to take care of others. And because you've spent your whole life believing that your worth is tied to being helpful and selfless, this guilt feels like proof that you're doing something wrong, that you're becoming a bad person, that you need to correct course immediately. But here's what the guilt is actually telling you. It's telling you that you're breaking a pattern, that you're doing something unfamiliar, that you're challenging a belief system that has governed your life for decades. The guilt isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong. It's evidence that you're doing something different. And different, when you've been conditioned to believe that your role is to prioritize others above yourself, feels dangerous. It feels like abandonment. It feels like you're violating some sacred contract, even though that contract was never fair, was never mutually agreed upon, and has been costing you dearly for years. The guilt is also complicated by the responses you receive when you do set boundaries. Sometimes people react with confusion, disappointment, or even anger. They're used to you saying yes. They're accustomed to you being available, flexible, accommodating. When you suddenly aren't, it disrupts their expectations, and their reaction reinforces your guilt. See, you think, I knew this was wrong, I knew I was being selfish, I'm hurting them by prioritizing myself. But what's actually happening is that you're changing a dynamic that was working well for them but not for you. And their discomfort with that change doesn't mean the change is wrong. It means they're experiencing the natural consequences of a relationship recalibrating toward greater balance. Some people will adjust, they'll respect your boundaries, they'll even appreciate you more for being honest about your limits, but some people won't. Some people benefited too much from your endless giving. Some people liked having someone who always put them first. Some people are so accustomed to you managing their emotions that they don't know how to function without that support. And when you pull back, when you stop over-functioning, they might try to pull you back into the old pattern. They might use guilt themselves. They might remind you of all the times they needed you. They might suggest you're changing in negative ways. They might call you selfish, the word you fear most. And if your guilt is strong enough, if your conditioning is deep enough, you might cave. You might abandon your boundary and return to the familiar pattern of putting everyone else first. But here's what's important to understand. The guilt you feel when setting boundaries is not the same as doing something wrong. Guilt is just an emotion. It's information about your conditioning, about your beliefs, about what you've learned to associate with being good or bad. It's not objective truth. It's not moral judgment from the universe. It's a signal from a part of you that's afraid of change, afraid of conflict, afraid of not being needed anymore. And while the guilt feels overwhelming, while it feels like it's telling you something important about your character, it's actually just telling you something about your history, about what you learned, about what you've been practicing, about patterns that are so ingrained they feel like identity. Learning to tolerate the guilt of boundary setting is one of the most important skills you can develop. It requires recognizing that you can feel guilty and still make the right choice. That discomfort doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, that other people's disappointment isn't evidence of your failure, that prioritizing yourself, even when it feels selfish, is actually an act of self-preservation, self-respect, self-love. It requires building a new relationship with guilt where you can observe it, acknowledge it, and not let it control your choices. Where you can say, I notice I'm feeling guilty, and that makes sense given my history, but I'm still going to maintain this boundary because I know it's what I need. This doesn't happen overnight. You don't suddenly become someone who sets boundaries without guilt. The guilt persists, sometimes for a long time. But over time, as you practice setting boundaries and surviving the guilt, as you notice that the world doesn't end when you prioritize yourself, as you experience the relief and freedom that come with saying no, the guilt gradually loses some of its power. It's still there, still uncomfortable, but it's no longer a stopping force. It's just weather passing through your internal landscape. And you learn to move forward despite it, to make choices based on what you actually need rather than what the guilt is telling you to do. And slowly, so slowly you might not even notice it happening, the guilt begins to transform. It becomes quieter, less urgent, less convincing, and in its place something new emerges: self-trust. The belief that you deserve to take up space, to have needs, to set limits. The understanding that caring for yourself doesn't make you selfish, it makes you sustainable. You've become an expert at overfunctioning, doing more than your share, anticipating needs, picking up emotional slack, managing logistics, smoothing over conflicts, keeping things running, and in some ways this makes you incredibly valuable in relationships. People depend on you, they appreciate you, they need you. But here's what happens over time. Your overfunctioning enables other people's underfunctioning. When you constantly step in to manage emotions, solve problems, or prevent discomfort, other people never have to develop those skills themselves. They become accustomed to you handling things. And you become accustomed to believing that if you don't handle things, they won't get handled at all. This creates an exhausting dynamic where you're carrying the emotional and practical weight of the relationship, while others get to remain unburdened. Not because they're malicious, but because you've made it so easy for them. You've taken on the responsibility so completely that they've learned they don't have to. And the more you do, the more unbalanced the relationship becomes, until you're drowning in responsibility while they're floating comfortably, never realizing how much you're holding. Overfunctioning shows up in predictable patterns. In romantic relationships, you're the one who remembers important dates, plans activities, manages social connections with both families, notices when something needs to be discussed, initiates difficult conversations, tracks household needs, mental load, emotional labor. Your partner might help when asked, but you're the one doing the asking, the organizing, the remembering. You're the project manager of the relationship, and they're the person who shows up when given clear instructions. This creates an exhausting inequality, where you're not just participating in the relationship, you're running it. In friendships, you're the one who reaches out, who makes plans, who checks in when someone's been quiet, who remembers what's happening in people's lives and asks about it. Your friends might be warm and caring when you're together, but they're not tracking the relationship the way you are. They're not noticing when it's been too long since you connected. They're not wondering if you're okay. They're not initiating contact. They're simply receiving your consistent attention and showing up when you make it easy for them. And because you're so good at maintaining these friendships, they never have to think about it. They never have to put in the effort because you're putting in enough for both of you. At work, you're the one who takes on extra projects, who stays late to help colleagues, who smooths over team tensions, who makes sure everyone feels included, who picks up the slack when others drop the ball. You're not doing this because anyone asked you to. You're doing it because you see what needs to be done, and you can't tolerate the discomfort of leaving it undone. You can't tolerate the possibility of conflict or failure, or someone being upset. So you step in, you manage, you fix, you carry, and your colleagues appreciate it. They might even praise you for being so helpful, so reliable, so dedicated, but they're also learning to depend on your overfunctioning. They're learning that they can do less because you'll do more. They're learning that you're the safety net, the backup plan, the person who makes sure everything works out. This pattern creates a particular kind of trap, because your overfunctioning makes you valuable, needed, appreciated. People depend on you. They tell you how much they appreciate you, how they don't know what they'd do without you. And this feels good in some ways. It confirms your worth, it proves you matter, it validates the role you've been playing your entire life. But it also keeps you trapped in that role. Because if you stop overfunctioning, if you start doing only your fair share, people notice. They're confused, they're disappointed, they might even be upset, and their reaction confirms your deepest fear. That you're only valued for what you do, not for who you are. That if you stop performing this role, you'll lose your place in people's lives. The exhausting part of overfunctioning is that it's invisible work. Most people don't see all that you're doing. They don't see the mental load you're carrying, the emotional management you're performing, the logistics you're tracking, the problems you're preventing before they even occur. They see the smooth outcome. They experience the conflict-free environment. They benefit from your constant labour, but they don't recognise it as labour because you make it look effortless. You make it look like it's just who you are, just how you naturally operate, not the result of enormous ongoing effort. So they don't think to thank you. They don't think to reciprocate. They don't think to ask if you need support. Because from their perspective, you seem fine. You seem like you have everything handled, and you do have everything handled. But at what cost? At the cost of your own needs being perpetually sidelined, at the cost of exhaustion that never lifts, at the cost of relationships that feel fundamentally imbalanced, at the cost of resentment that builds slowly beneath the surface, even as you continue performing the same patterns. Because here's the truth about overfunctioning. Eventually it breeds resentment. You might not want to feel resentful. You might judge yourself for feeling it. But it's there. The quiet anger at carrying so much while others carry so little. The frustration at being the one who always has to think ahead, plan, organise, manage. The hurt at not receiving the same level of care and attention you give. The loneliness of being in relationships where the effort is so dramatically one-sided. Learning to stop overfunctioning requires something counterintuitive. It requires letting things fall apart a little, letting the natural consequences of other people's underfunctioning become visible, letting people experience what happens when you don't step in. This feels terrifying because you've spent your whole life preventing exactly this. You've been the one who makes sure nothing falls through the cracks, who keeps everything running smoothly. But if you want relationships to become more balanced, other people need to step up. And they won't step up as long as you're doing everything. They need to experience the space where their participation is required, where their effort matters, where the relationship doesn't function without their contribution. This doesn't mean punishing them or withdrawing completely. It means doing your part and only your part. It means trusting that other people are capable of handling what's theirs to handle. It means releasing your grip on outcomes and allowing relationships to find a more natural, sustainable balance. There's a word that terrifies you more than almost any other. Selfish. The accusation that you're thinking of yourself too much, prioritizing your own needs, not being considerate enough of others. This fear is so powerful that you'll bend yourself into uncomfortable shapes just to avoid anyone thinking you're self-centered. You'll say yes when you mean no. You'll give when you're empty. You'll prioritize others when you're struggling yourself. All to maintain the image of someone who is good, kind, generous, never demanding. But here's the truth behind this fear. It was planted, usually early, usually subtly. Perhaps through a parent who called you selfish when you expressed needs. Perhaps through a culture that praised self-sacrifice and criticized self-care. Perhaps through religious or social teachings that equated goodness with selflessness. Whatever the source, the message was clear. Your needs are less important than others' comfort. Thinking of yourself is morally wrong. Being selfish is the worst thing you could be. And so, you learn to monitor yourself constantly, to police your own desires, to feel shame whenever you prioritize your own well-being. This fear of being called selfish shapes almost everything you do. It's why you apologize excessively, why you minimize your accomplishments, why you downplay your needs, why you feel uncomfortable receiving compliments, why you deflect attention away from yourself, why you always make sure everyone else is taken care of before even considering your own comfort. The accusation of selfishness feels like a moral condemnation, a judgment about your fundamental character. And because you've internalized the belief that selfishness is one of the worst possible traits, you'll do almost anything to avoid it. But here's what's actually happening. The concept of selfishness has been weaponized against you. It's been used to keep you compliant, accommodating, self-sacrificing. When you were a child and you expressed a need that inconvenienced someone, maybe you were told you were being selfish. When you wanted something for yourself, when you prioritized your own desires, when you didn't want to share or give up something that was yours, you might have been shamed for being selfish. These early experiences taught you that having needs, wanting things, prioritizing yourself in any way is morally wrong. That good people are selfless. That love means constant giving. That your role is to serve others, not to serve yourself. This conditioning runs deep. So deep that you might not even recognize when you're making decisions based on avoiding the accusation of selfishness rather than based on what you actually want or need. You automatically say yes to requests because no feels selfish. You automatically take on extra work because asking others to do their share feels selfish. You automatically suppress your preferences because expressing them feels selfish. You've created an internal hierarchy where everyone else's needs are inherently more important than yours, not because that's objectively true, but because you've been conditioned to believe that prioritizing yourself is morally reprehensible. The irony is that the people who are actually selfish, the people who routinely prioritize themselves without consideration for others, rarely worry about being called selfish. They're comfortable with their choices. They don't internalize shame about having needs or taking up space. But you, someone who gives endlessly, who considers others constantly, who sacrifices your own well-being for everyone else, you're terrified of being selfish. You're hypervigilant about it. You're constantly checking yourself, judging yourself, making sure you're not taking too much, asking too much, needing too much. This fear keeps you trapped in patterns of self-denial and overgiving, even as it depletes you. What you need to understand is that there's a crucial difference between being selfish and having a self. Selfish means consistently prioritizing yourself without regard for others' well-being. Having a self means recognizing that your needs matter as much as anyone else's, that you deserve care, attention, and consideration, that relationships should be reciprocal, that it's not only okay but necessary to prioritize yourself sometimes. Having a self means setting boundaries, expressing needs, making choices that serve your well-being. None of that is selfish. It's self-preservation, it's self-respect, it's self-care, and it's absolutely essential for sustainable relationships and a sustainable life. The fear of being called selfish also makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Because when people know that you're terrified of being seen as selfish, they can use that fear to control your behavior. They can call you selfish when you set a boundary. They can accuse you of being self-centered when you express a need. They can suggest you're not being considerate when you prioritize yourself. And if your fear of selfishness is strong enough, you'll abandon your boundary, suppress your need, sacrifice your well-being, all to prove that you're not selfish. This gives others enormous power over you, and it keeps you trapped in relationships where your needs are perpetually secondary. Learning to tolerate the accusation of selfishness, whether it comes from others or from your own internalized voice, is essential for your well-being. It requires recognizing that the accusation might say more about the person making it than about you. That sometimes people call you selfish precisely because you're no longer allowing them to take advantage of your selflessness. That being called selfish by someone who benefits from your endless giving is not actually evidence of your character. It's evidence that they're uncomfortable with the changing dynamic, and it requires building your own definition of what's selfish versus what's self-care, what's self-centered versus what's self-aware, what's inconsiderate versus what's simply taking care of yourself, and trusting your own judgment about where those lines are, rather than allowing fear or others' opinions to define them for you. It's a strange kind of loneliness. You're surrounded by people. You have relationships, connections, friendships. But despite being everyone's support system, you often feel completely alone, because the relationships you've built are fundamentally unbalanced. You hold space for everyone else's feelings, but rarely feel safe expressing your own. You listen to everyone's problems, but don't feel comfortable sharing yours. You show up for others consistently, but when you need support, you either don't ask, or you minimize what you need so much that people don't realize how much you're struggling. This creates a particular isolation. You're emotionally intimate with people in one direction only. You know their depths, their fears, their struggles, but they don't really know yours, not because they don't care, but because you've never let them in. You've been so busy being the strong one, the supportive one, the one who has it together, that you've accidentally created relationships where your vulnerability has no space, and so you carry your own burdens alone, while carrying everyone else's too. This loneliness is particularly painful because it exists within connection. You're not isolated in the traditional sense, you're not lacking relationships or social interaction. In fact, you might have many people in your life, but the connections feel hollow in some fundamental way, because connection requires reciprocity. It requires mutual vulnerability. It requires both people being seen, known, held. And in your relationships, only one person is truly being seen. The other people in your life know you as the helper, the listener, the supporter. They know what you do for them, but they don't know what's happening inside you. They don't know about your struggles, your fears, your needs, your pain, because you don't share those things. You don't reveal them. You keep them carefully hidden, believing that your role is to be strong for others, not to need others to be strong for you. This pattern creates relationships where you feel perpetually alone even when you're with people, because you're performing a role rather than showing up as your full self. You're presenting a carefully curated version of who you are, the capable version, the together version, the version that doesn't need much, and while people might love and appreciate that version, it's not actually you. It's a construction, a persona, a way of being that protects others from having to deal with your complexity, your struggles, your humanity. And protecting others from your humanity means you never get to experience the relief, the comfort, the deep connection of being fully seen and accepted. The loneliness also comes from the exhaustion of one-sided support. You're constantly giving emotional energy, but rarely receiving it. You listen to people's problems for hours, offering comfort and perspective and validation. But when you have a problem, you handle it yourself. You process it alone. You work through it internally. Maybe you tell people a sanitized version, a brief update that doesn't really convey the depth of what you're experiencing. But you don't lean on them the way they lean on you. You don't seek the same level of support you provide. And over time, this creates a deficit. You're emotionally depleted because you're pouring out constantly but rarely being filled up. You're carrying your own weight plus everyone else's, with no one to share the load. Part of what makes this loneliness so difficult is that it's hard to explain. How do you tell someone that you feel alone even though you're surrounded by people who care about you? How do you explain that the relationships feel insufficient even though nothing is obviously wrong? How do you articulate that you're exhausted from supporting everyone while feeling unsupported yourself? It can sound ungrateful, or like you're blaming people who haven't necessarily done anything wrong, because the truth is they haven't. They're simply responding to what you've taught them. You've taught them that you don't need support, that you're fine, that you're the strong one, and they've learned that lesson. They've learned to come to you, but not to offer the same in return because you've never indicated you need it. Breaking this pattern of loneliness requires vulnerability, real vulnerability. The kind that feels terrifying because it means showing people the parts of yourself you've been hiding. It means admitting when you're struggling. It means asking for support when you need it. It means revealing that you're not always okay, that you don't always have it together, that you need care and comfort and help, just like everyone else. This is incredibly difficult when you've spent your whole life being the caretaker, when your identity is built around being the strong one, when you believe that your value comes from being needed rather than from being known, but it's necessary. Because without vulnerability, without reciprocity, without mutual support, relationships remain superficial no matter how long they've existed or how much time you spend together. Learning to share your struggles, to express your needs, to let people see your humanity doesn't come naturally when you've practiced the opposite for so long. It requires conscious effort. It requires choosing to share even when every instinct tells you to keep it to yourself. It requires asking for help even when you're convinced you should handle it alone. It requires trusting that people can hold your vulnerability without being overwhelmed, that they can support you the way you've supported them, that revealing your struggles won't make you a burden or push them away, and it requires accepting that some people won't be able to meet you in this vulnerability. Some people are so accustomed to you being the support person that they can't shift into supporting you, and that's important information. It tells you which relationships have the potential for reciprocity and which ones are built on your perpetual giving. The ones that can adjust, that can meet you in mutual vulnerability, that can support you as you've supported them, those are the relationships worth investing in. The ones that can't, the ones where your needs feel like an inconvenience or where people seem confused by your vulnerability, those might need to change or end, because you deserve relationships where you're not just the support system. You deserve to be supported too. Here's a difficult truth that might be hard to hear. Sometimes, feeling responsible for everyone's happiness is about control as much as it's about care. Not control in a manipulative sense, but control in a protective sense. If you can manage everyone's emotions, if you can keep everyone happy, then the environment stays predictable, safe, stable. This control soothes your own anxiety. It gives you a sense of agency in situations that might otherwise feel chaotic. When you were a child and the adults around you were unpredictable, volatile, or emotionally unstable, learning to manage their moods gave you a way to create safety. If you could keep them happy, you could keep yourself safe. That pattern continues into adulthood. By taking responsibility for everyone's emotional state, you're attempting to control outcomes, to prevent conflict, to maintain stability. But this kind of control is exhausting, because you can't actually control other people's feelings. You can't prevent all discomfort. You can't make everyone happy all the time, and trying to do so keeps you trapped in an impossible task. This connection between control and care is subtle but important. On the surface, taking responsibility for everyone's happiness looks like compassion, like generosity, like love, and those elements are genuinely present. You do care about people, you do want them to be happy, you do feel genuine empathy for their struggles, but underneath that care is also anxiety. Anxiety about what happens if people are upset, anxiety about conflict, tension, instability, anxiety about being blamed, being rejected, being abandoned, and managing everyone's emotions is a way of managing that anxiety. It's a way of creating a sense of control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. When you were young, you learned that other people's emotions had direct consequences for you. When a parent was happy, the atmosphere was light. When they were upset, the atmosphere became heavy, tense, maybe even frightening. Their emotional state determined your emotional reality, and you discovered that you could influence their emotional state through your behavior. If you were good, helpful, quiet, accommodating, you could sometimes shift their mood in a positive direction. This gave you a sense of power in a situation where you otherwise felt powerless. You couldn't control many aspects of your childhood environment, but you could try to control the emotional climate by managing your own behavior and by trying to manage others' reactions to you. This learned strategy continues into adulthood, but the context changes. You're no longer a child dependent on adults for survival. You're an adult in relationships with other adults. But the strategy remains. You still believe that if you can just manage the emotional environment well enough, if you can keep everyone comfortable and happy, then you'll be safe. Safe from conflict, safe from rejection, safe from abandonment, safe from the chaos of other people's unmanaged emotions. This creates a pattern where you're hypervigilant about everyone's emotional state because their emotions feel like something you need to control in order to feel okay yourself. The exhausting part of this control strategy is that it doesn't actually work. Not really. You might be able to influence people's emotions temporarily. You might be able to smooth over a tense moment or cheer someone up when they're down. But you can't control their emotional lives. You can't prevent them from having bad days, difficult emotions, struggles that have nothing to do with you. You can't make them happy if they're fundamentally unhappy. You can't fix problems that are theirs to solve. You can't take responsibility for their emotional well-being without exhausting yourself in the attempt. Because other people's emotions are not actually yours to control. They're the result of their own experiences, thoughts, beliefs, circumstances. You can influence, you can support, you can be kind, but you can't control. And trying to control what's inherently uncontrollable keeps you in a perpetual state of anxiety and effort. There's also something important to recognize about what this control strategy costs you. It costs you authenticity. Because when you're constantly managing everyone's emotions, you can't be authentic in your own responses. You have to calculate everything. You have to think about how your words will land, how your emotions will affect others, how your needs will disrupt their comfort. You can't just be. You can't just react naturally. You can't just express what you're thinking or feeling. Everything has to be filtered through the question of how it will affect everyone else's emotional state. This creates a life where you're constantly performing, constantly managing, constantly in control mode rather than in genuine expression mode. Learning to release this need for control requires developing tolerance for uncertainty and discomfort. It requires accepting that people will have their own emotions that you don't cause and can't fix. That conflict might happen, and you'll survive it. That someone might be upset and it won't destroy you or the relationship. That you don't need to manage everyone's emotional experience to be safe. That other people's emotions are their responsibility, not yours. This feels terrifying at first because it means letting go of the strategy that has kept you feeling safe for so long. But it's also liberating. Because when you stop trying to control everyone's emotions, you get to relax. You get to be authentic. You get to stop carrying the impossible responsibility of managing everyone's inner world. You get to focus your energy on what's actually yours to manage, which is your own emotional experience, your own behavior, your own boundaries. And that's more than enough. When someone tries to take care of you, when someone offers support or help or kindness without you asking for it, something uncomfortable happens. You deflect, you minimize, you insist you're fine, you turn the conversation back to them, you find ways to not receive what's being offered. This isn't ingratitude, it's discomfort with the reversal of roles. Receiving care means being seen in your need, in your vulnerability, in your not having it all togetherness. And that feels dangerous, because you've built your identity, your sense of worth, around being the caretaker, the one who doesn't need, the one who's strong, the one who gives. Receiving threatens that identity. It also triggers deep fears. If you allow yourself to need someone, they might disappoint you, they might not show up, they might prove that people aren't reliable, which would validate the belief that taught you to be self-sufficient in the first place. So you keep people at arm's length when it comes to your own needs, accepting care in only the smallest, most controlled ways, always maintaining the upper hand by giving more than you receive. This difficulty receiving care shows up in countless small moments. Someone offers to help you with a task and you immediately say, "No, I've got it." Someone asks how you're doing, and even if you're struggling, you say, "I'm fine, how are you?" Someone brings you a gift and you feel awkward, uncomfortable, already thinking about how you need to reciprocate. Someone offers emotional support and you minimize what you're going through so they don't feel obligated to help. Someone compliments you and you deflect it or downplay it or redirect the attention away from yourself. Each of these moments is an opportunity to receive care, and each time you reject it, deflect it, or minimize it, because receiving feels more uncomfortable than giving. Part of what makes receiving so difficult is the vulnerability it requires. When you give to others, you're in control. You're the one offering, choosing what to give, deciding how much. You're in the power position. But when you receive, you're in a vulnerable position. You're the one with the need, the one who couldn't handle it alone, the one who required help. And vulnerability feels dangerous when you've learned that needing anything makes you weak, burdensome, or at risk of disappointment. Receiving also requires trust. Trust that the person offering care is doing so genuinely, not out of obligation. Trust that they won't use your need against you later. Trust that accepting help won't make them see you as incompetent or needy. Trust that they want to support you the way you support them. But the biggest barrier to receiving might be identity. You've built your entire sense of self around being the giver, the helper, the strong one. That's who you believe you are. That's what makes you valuable. That's your role in relationships. If you start receiving, if you start being the one who needs help, who are you? This question threatens your fundamental understanding of yourself and your place in the world. Because if you're not the caretaker, if you're not the one everyone depends on, what's your value? What's your purpose? This fear keeps you locked into the giving role, even when it depletes you, even when you desperately need to receive. Because receiving would require a fundamental shift in how you see yourself. There's also conditioning around deservingness. Deep down, you might not believe you deserve to receive care in the same way others do. You might believe that other people's needs are legitimate while yours are not. That other people deserve support while you should be able to handle things yourself. That accepting help is fine for others but self-indulgent for you. This belief keeps you stuck in a pattern where you give endlessly to others while denying yourself the same care, creating a fundamental inequality in how you treat yourself versus how you treat everyone else. Learning to receive requires practice and intentionality. It requires saying yes when someone offers help, even when your instinct is to say no. It requires letting yourself be vulnerable enough to express a need. It requires accepting compliments with a simple thank you instead of deflecting. It requires allowing people to support you without immediately reciprocating. It requires sitting with the discomfort of being cared for without being in control. It requires challenging the belief that your worth is tied to giving and that receiving makes you weak or burdensome. And it requires recognizing that healthy relationships require reciprocity, that love flows both ways, that you deserve to be held as much as you hold others. This doesn't happen quickly or easily. It takes time to rewire patterns that have been in place for decades, but slowly with practice, receiving can become less threatening. You can learn that being cared for doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. You can learn that needing people doesn't make you a burden, it makes you connected. You can learn that accepting care doesn't threaten your identity, it enriches it, adding depth and authenticity to relationships that were previously one-sided. When someone around you is uncomfortable, upset, or in any form of distress, your anxiety spikes immediately. Not in a way that makes you afraid for yourself, but in a way that makes you responsible for fixing it. Their discomfort becomes your emergency. Their bad mood becomes your problem to solve. Their disappointment becomes your failure. This creates a life where you're constantly managing other people's emotional experiences as if their feelings are happening to you rather than to them. You can't sit with someone's sadness without trying to cheer them up. You can't witness someone's anger without trying to diffuse it. You can't tolerate someone's silence without filling it with questions, reassurance, or attempts to make things better. But here's what this prevents. It prevents other people from processing their own emotions. It prevents them from building their own emotional resilience. It prevents you from learning that other people's feelings aren't your responsibility, that people can be uncomfortable and survive, that negative emotions are part of being human, not problems that need immediate solutions. And most importantly, it prevents you from relaxing, because you're living as if you're responsible for the emotional stability of everyone around you. This anxiety about other people's discomfort is rooted in early learning. As a child, you learned that when the adults around you were uncomfortable or upset, bad things happened. The atmosphere became tense. There might have been conflict, withdrawal, unpredictability. Their discomfort directly affected your sense of safety. And you discovered that if you could somehow alleviate their discomfort, if you could make them feel better, the atmosphere would stabilize and you would feel safe again. This created a powerful association. Other people's discomfort equals danger. Your ability to fix their discomfort equals safety. This association runs so deep that even now, as an adult, when someone around you shows any sign of emotional distress, your nervous system responds as if you're in danger and you need to fix the situation immediately to restore safety. The problem is, you're no longer a child dependent on adults' emotional states for your literal survival. You're an adult, and other people's emotions don't actually threaten your safety. But your nervous system doesn't know that. It's still operating from that old program where emotional distress in others equals danger for you. So when your partner seems withdrawn, when your friend seems sad, when your colleague seems frustrated, your anxiety spikes and you feel compelled to fix it. Not just because you care about them, though you do, but because their distress triggers your own internal alarm system that says danger, fix this, make it better, restore stability. This creates a pattern where you can't simply be with people in their emotions. You can't offer compassionate presence without also trying to change their emotional state. You can't witness their struggle without jumping in to solve it. You can't tolerate the discomfort of not knowing if they're okay. And here's what this costs them. It costs them the opportunity to feel their feelings fully, to process them, to develop their own capacity to move through difficult emotions. When you constantly rush in to fix, to cheer up, to solve, you're inadvertently communicating that their emotions are too much, that they can't handle them, that they need you to make them feel better. This keeps them dependent on external regulation, rather than developing internal regulation. It also costs you. It costs you the ability to be in relationship without constant emotional labour. It costs you the peace of knowing that other people's emotions are theirs to manage. It costs you the freedom to simply be present with someone without feeling responsible for changing their state. It costs you the relaxation that comes from trusting that people are capable, resilient, and able to handle their own emotional experiences. Because you're operating from a place of constant vigilance, constant readiness to intervene, constant belief that if you don't fix their discomfort, something bad will happen. Learning to tolerate other people's discomfort without rushing to fix it is one of the most challenging but necessary skills you can develop. It requires recognizing that uncomfortable emotions are not emergencies, that people can be sad, angry, frustrated, disappointed, anxious, and still be okay. That feeling these emotions is actually part of healing, part of processing, part of being human. That your job is not to prevent people from feeling difficult things, but to be present with them while they feel those things. This is a radical shift from fix-it mode to witness mode, from rescue to presence, from problem-solving to companionship. This doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means caring in a different way. It means asking, how can I support you right now, instead of assuming you need to fix it? It means saying, I'm here with you, instead of, let me make this better. It means trusting that people will ask for what they need, rather than assuming you know what they need. It means allowing silence, allowing tears, allowing frustration without feeling like you have to fill the space or change the emotion. It means developing the capacity to sit with discomfort, both theirs and your own anxiety, about their discomfort, without needing to act. This is deeply uncomfortable at first because it goes against everything you've practiced. Your instinct is to jump in, to fix, to make better. Sitting with someone's distress without trying to change it feels like failing, like not caring, like abandoning them, but actually it's one of the most loving things you can do. It communicates trust in their capacity. It honours their emotional experience. It allows them space to feel and process, rather than suppressing or bypassing their emotions to make you more comfortable. And over time, as you practice this, you'll notice something remarkable. People are more resilient than you thought. They can handle difficult emotions. They can work through problems. They can sit with discomfort and emerge on the other side. And they don't need you to manage their emotional experience. They just need you to be present while they move through it themselves. And that presence, that witnessing, that companionship is often more valuable than any attempt to fix could ever be. When you spend your whole life tuning into other people's needs, emotions, and preferences, something happens to your sense of self. It becomes blurry, uncertain, hard to access. You stop knowing what you want because you've been focused entirely on what everyone else wants. You stop knowing what you feel because you've been managing everyone else's feelings. You stop knowing what you need because you've trained yourself to only notice other people's needs. This loss of self is gradual and often invisible. It doesn't happen dramatically. It happens in small moments of self-erasure. Every time you say, I don't care whatever you want, when you actually do have a preference. Every time you suppress your own emotions to tend to someone else's. Every time you set aside your plans, your goals, your desires to accommodate others. Over years, these moments accumulate, and you wake up one day realizing you don't know who you are outside of being helpful, useful, needed. Your identity has become so intertwined with taking care of others that the idea of focusing on yourself feels foreign, uncomfortable, almost impossible. This loss of self starts with simple things. Preferences. What movie do you want to watch? You genuinely don't know because you've spent so long considering what everyone else would enjoy that you've stopped tracking your own preferences. Where do you want to eat? It doesn't matter, wherever makes everyone else happy. What do you want to do this weekend? Whatever works for everyone else's schedule. These might seem like small concessions, minor accommodations, but they're actually moments of self-erasure. Moments where you're reinforcing the pattern that your preferences don't matter, that your desires are less important, that your role is to adapt to others rather than express yourself. Over time, this extends beyond preferences into deeper aspects of identity. What are your goals? You might have difficulty answering because you've been so focused on supporting everyone else's goals that you haven't developed your own. What brings you joy? You're not sure because you've been deriving joy from making others happy rather than from activities that genuinely fulfill you. What do you value? It's hard to say because you've been so busy aligning with everyone else's values that you've lost touch with your own. Who are you? This is the most difficult question because your answer is likely to be defined entirely in relation to others. I'm someone's partner, parent, friend, colleague. I'm someone who helps, who supports, who takes care of others. But who are you independent of those roles? What's left when you strip away all the caretaking, all the accommodating, all the managing of everyone else's needs? This loss of self is particularly painful because it happens in the name of love. You didn't deliberately erase yourself. You were trying to be good, to be caring, to be the person everyone needed. You were trying to maintain harmony, to keep everyone happy, to be valuable. But in that effort, you lost something essential. You lost connection with your own inner world. You lost the ability to tune into your own needs, desires, preferences, values. You lost the practice of honouring yourself the way you honour everyone else. And now, when you try to access your own wants or needs, there's often just blankness, uncertainty, a sense of not knowing because you've been so out of practice with attending to yourself. This loss also creates vulnerability in relationships. Because when you don't have a strong sense of self, you become whoever you think others need you to be. You adapt, you accommodate, you mold yourself to fit what seems to be required. This makes you a chameleon in relationships, changing to match what each person seems to want, never showing up as a consistent, authentic self. And this prevents real intimacy, because people can't truly know you if you're constantly shifting to meet their needs. They can only know the version of you that you present to them, the version that's been carefully calibrated to make them comfortable. The real you, the authentic you, the you with actual preferences and needs and desires, remains hidden, maybe even from yourself. Reconnecting with your sense of self requires intentional practice. It requires starting to notice and honour your preferences, even small ones. It requires taking time alone to tune into your own emotional experience without the constant pull of managing others. It requires asking yourself what you want, what you need, what you feel, and actually taking the time to find the answer. It requires making choices based on your own desires rather than on what will make everyone else happy. It requires disappointing people sometimes, setting boundaries sometimes, prioritizing yourself sometimes. And all of this feels selfish, uncomfortable, wrong at first because it goes against decades of conditioning. But slowly, with practice, you begin to remember who you are. You begin to reconnect with your authentic self, the self that exists independent of your usefulness to others. And that reconnection is essential, because you can't have healthy relationships when you've lost yourself. You can only have healthy relationships when you show up as a whole person, with your own needs, desires, and identity. When you're someone rather than just someone who serves everyone else. There's a pattern you might have noticed but haven't fully understood. You keep attracting people who take more than they give. People who are comfortable letting you do the emotional heavy lifting. People who share their problems but never ask about yours. People who accept your support but aren't really there when you need them. This isn't coincidence. When you present yourself as someone who doesn't need much, who's always available, who's happy to give without expecting reciprocity, you attract people who are looking for exactly that. Not necessarily because they're bad people, but because you've made it clear through your behaviour that this is the dynamic you'll accept. You've taught people that you're the giver and they can be the receiver, that you're fine with the imbalance, that you don't expect mutual support, and over time your relationships become a collection of people who depend on you while you depend on no one. This keeps you trapped in the role you're trying to escape, surrounded by relationships that drain you rather than sustain you, wondering why you always end up carrying everyone else's weight. This pattern happens because people respond to what you show them. If you show them someone who is endlessly giving, who never expresses needs, who seems completely self-sufficient, they learn to interact with you based on that presentation. They learn that you're the support person. They learn that they can share their problems with you, and you'll listen, offer advice, provide comfort. They learn that you'll make time for them when they need it. They learn that you're reliable, available, generous with your attention and care. And because you seem so capable, so together, so fine. They don't think to offer the same in return. They don't realize you might need support too because you never indicate that you do. This isn't always conscious on their part. They're not deliberately taking advantage. They're simply responding to the dynamic you've established. You've trained them through consistent behavior that this is how the relationship works. You give, they receive. You support, they lean. You're strong, they're struggling. And because this dynamic feels familiar to you, because it's how you've operated in relationships your entire life, you continue it even as it depletes you. You continue showing up for them while never showing them your own struggles. You continue listening to their problems while keeping yours to yourself. You continue being available when they need you while not expecting them to be available when you need them. The frustrating part is that this pattern keeps repeating across different relationships. It's not just one person, it's a type. It's people who are comfortable being supported but not comfortable supporting. People who are happy to receive but not accustomed to giving. People who have learned, often from their own history, that relationships are about their needs being met. And you attract these people because you fit perfectly into that dynamic. You're looking for people to take care of, and they're looking for someone to take care of them. It's a match, but it's an unhealthy one. Because healthy relationships require reciprocity, and this dynamic has none. Breaking this pattern requires two things. First, you need to start showing up differently in relationships. You need to express your needs. You need to ask for support. You need to share your struggles. You need to indicate that you're not just a support system, but a full human being who needs care too. This will feel uncomfortable, vulnerable, risky. Because you're changing the dynamic you've always maintained. You're revealing parts of yourself you usually keep hidden. You're asking for something you've never asked for before. And some people won't respond well. Some people will be uncomfortable with this change. Some people will pull away because they were in relationship with your caretaking role, not with your authentic self. Second, you need to be more selective about who you invest in. You need to notice the signs of one-sided relationships earlier. You need to pay attention to whether care flows both ways or only one way. You need to observe whether people ask about you with genuine interest, or whether conversations always center on them. You need to track whether people show up for you the way you show up for them, or whether you're always the one doing the heavy lifting. And when you notice patterns of imbalance, you need to address them, or accept that the relationship isn't healthy and might need to end. This is difficult because you've been taught that ending relationships means you're giving up, being unkind, not trying hard enough. But actually, choosing not to continue pouring energy into one-sided relationships is self-preservation. It's recognizing that your time, energy, and care are valuable and should be invested in relationships where they're reciprocated. The relationships that survive this shift, the people who can meet you in mutual support, who can give as well as receive, who value you for who you are rather than just what you do for them, those are the relationships worth nurturing. Those are the ones that will nourish you rather than deplete you. Those are the ones where love flows both ways, where care is reciprocal, where you can finally experience what it's like to be in a relationship without carrying all the weight yourself. And that experience, that feeling of mutual support, of being held as you hold others, of genuine reciprocity is worth waiting for. It's worth being selective for. It's worth the discomfort of changing your patterns and possibly losing relationships that were never serving you anyway. There's a belief operating beneath your awareness, so deeply embedded that you don't even recognize it as a belief. You experience it as truth. The belief that your needs are inherently too much, that asking for anything is imposing, that requiring support makes you difficult, that expressing what you want is demanding. This belief shapes everything. It's why you apologize before asking for the smallest favor, why you frame your needs as questions rather than statements, why you downplay what you're struggling with so people don't feel obligated to help, why you feel guilty for needing anything at all. This didn't come from nowhere. It came from experiences where your needs were met with resistance, irritation, or dismissal, where the message, spoken or unspoken, was that you were asking for too much, being too needy, requiring too much effort, and so you learned to minimize yourself, to require as little as possible, to become someone who gives everything and asks for nothing, believing that this is what makes you lovable, acceptable, worthy of connection. This belief about your needs being burdensome shows up in countless subtle ways. You hesitate before asking for help, even with tasks that are genuinely too much for one person. You apologize excessively when you do ask for something, trying to soften the request, trying to make it as small and unimposing as possible. You offer extensive justification for why you need what you're asking for, as if you need to prove that your need is legitimate. You give people multiple outs, making it clear they can say no, that you'll be fine if they can't help, that you don't want to inconvenience them. All of this communicates that you believe your needs are an imposition, that you're asking for something you don't quite deserve, that you're sorry for having needs at all. This belief also affects how you respond when people don't meet your needs. Instead of feeling hurt or frustrated, which would be natural responses, you immediately excuse them. You tell yourself they're busy, they have their own problems, they didn't mean to forget. You rationalize why your need wasn't important enough to prioritize. You convince yourself that you were asking for too much anyway. This protects you from feeling the disappointment of your needs being ignored, but it also reinforces the belief that your needs don't matter, that you shouldn't have asked in the first place, that you need to be even more self-sufficient going forward. The origin of this belief often lies in childhood experiences where your needs were consistently treated as problems. Maybe you had a parent who sighed heavily when you asked for something. Maybe you were told you were too much, too needy, too demanding. Maybe your needs were ignored or minimized. Maybe you were made to feel guilty for having needs at all, as if needing anything from your parents was a burden they shouldn't have to bear. These experiences taught you that your needs cause problems for others, that having needs makes you difficult, that the way to be loved is to need as little as possible. Or perhaps the message was more subtle. Perhaps your parents were overwhelmed, stressed, struggling themselves, and you, being a sensitive child, picked up on that stress and learned to not add to it. You learned to handle things yourself. You learned to not ask for help because you could see it would be one more thing for them to deal with. You learnt that being easy, being independent, being low maintenance made everything smoother for everyone. And that felt good in some ways. You felt proud of your independence, but you also internalized the message that your needs are burdens, that the less you need, the better, that love is earned through self-sufficiency. This belief creates a profound loneliness, because needs are part of being human, everyone has them. But you're operating as if your needs specifically are too much, while everyone else's needs are perfectly reasonable. This creates an inequality where you're constantly attending to others' needs while suppressing your own, where you're constantly giving while rarely receiving, where you're constantly accommodating others while never allowing others to accommodate you. And this imbalance is unsustainable. It leads to resentment, exhaustion, a sense of being unseen and uncared for even in the midst of relationships. Challenging this belief requires recognizing it as a belief rather than truth. Your needs are not too much. They're human. They're normal. They're as valid as anyone else's. Asking for support doesn't make you burdensome. It makes you honest. It makes you human. It makes you someone engaged in reciprocal relationships rather than one-sided caretaking. Learning to express needs without excessive apology, without justification, without making yourself small is essential. Learning to trust that people who care about you want to support you, that your needs matter to them, that asking for help is not an imposition but an invitation into deeper connection. This doesn't happen overnight. The belief is deeply rooted, but with practice, with conscious effort, with choosing to express needs even when it feels uncomfortable, you can slowly rewire this pattern. You can learn that your needs are not burdens, they're bridges, they're opportunities for others to show care, they're part of being in authentic reciprocal relationships, and you deserve relationships where your needs are met with care, not resistance, where asking for support is welcomed, not seen as demanding, where your humanity, including the parts that need and want and require, is accepted and honoured. Your body keeps the score, even when your mind has rationalized,
justify herself. This is standard procedure. These creatures are dangerous. They don't have proper documentation. The law is quite clear. Actually, Lifax said, his gelatinous form solidifying as he found something resembling courage in the depths of his database, the law is significantly less clear than you're suggesting, Agent Morrigan. According to the records I'm accessing, these cubs are registered under military treaty provisions that supersedes standard immigration protocols. Morrigan's eyes narrowed. Registered under what authority? Treaty Provision 81, subsection 12. The Interstellar Compact on Military Companion Assets, ratified after the Frontier Wars. Lifax was gaining confidence now, probably because he was reading directly from official documents, and official documents were the Glimmerian equivalent of comfort food. Any Rixian predators displaying trained behavioral patterns and genetic markers consistent with historical combat companion lines are protected under this treaty. They cannot be classified as mere biological imports. They're considered sentient adjacent military assets with protected status. That treaty hasn't been active in 15 years, Morrigan countered. The companion program was discontinued. Those provisions are obsolete. Obsolete and inactive are not the same as void, Thrumok said, stepping forward. His voice had taken on a different quality now, less checkpoint guard and more something older, something that remembered things. The treaty specifically states that its protections remain in effect for all qualifying Rixian predators and their descendants, regardless of program status. It was written that way deliberately. I should know. I was there when it was signed. That got everyone's attention. Even the cubs looked up at Thrumok with new interest. "You were there," Fallon repeated slowly. "At the treaty signing." "Galactic Marine Corps, 5th Special Operations Group," Thrumok said, and there was pride in his voice now. The kind that comes from having earned something through blood and fire. "I served alongside human units during the Frontier Wars, saw Ghost Company in action more times than I can count, watched human Rixian bonded pairs do things that shouldn't have been possible. They were, without exaggeration, the most effective combat units in the entire war." He moved closer to the cubs, who watched him with those golden eyes, but didn't retreat. One of them, the largest, made a low sound that wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a purr. Recognition, maybe. Or genetic memory of what its ancestors had been. "Ghost Company," Thrumok continued, his voice taking on the quality of someone telling a story that mattered, "was established in the 3rd year of the war when it became clear that conventional tactics weren't working against the insurgent forces in the outer territories. Someone, and I never did find out who, had the idea to try partnering human special forces."
You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix, but the kind that settles into your bones after weeks of sitting tall, chewing quietly, swallowing symbolism with every bite. You know the rules now. You know how to survive this place. But tonight, the palace will remind you why the rules exist. Because sometimes they kill. The banquet begins like any other. Low music, flickering candles, cold peacocks no one will touch. You've seen it all before. You're seated farther up the table than ever, closer to the Queen, a place of privilege and danger. You glance at the guests. Everyone is too quiet, too still. Something's off. The first course is soup, light, clear, poured from silver ewers. You lift your spoon, sip. The man across from you, Lord Colden, if you remember correctly, does the same. 10 seconds pass, then 20. And then suddenly he stiffens. Not dramatically, just a twitch, a blink too slow, a hand that hesitates as it reaches for bread. You see it. Others do too, but no one moves. Because this is how it begins, when someone follows the rules a little too well. Lord Calden continues to sit upright. He takes another spoonful. His mouth is tight. His hand trembles. The Queen says nothing. She glances toward him only once. By the second course, he's begun to sweat. By the third, his napkin slips to the floor, and he doesn't bend to retrieve it. You remember the stories. The Duke who died from poisoned quince. The lady who collapsed after a dish of salted almonds. All of them had followed the rules to the letter, never questioned, never paused, never stopped to wonder if obedience might be the trap. The roasted partridge is served. You touch it with your knife but don't eat. Colden, still playing his part, slices neatly, eats a bite, and then he slumps. No drama, just a slow fold. A servant is at his side instantly. A quiet murmur, a nod, and then the body is removed. The music never stops. No one cries out. No one even raises a glass. The chair is cleared, the plate removed. A new cushion is smoothed over the vacant seat, and within minutes the place Lord Culldin once filled is erased. You keep your face still, your breathing steady, but inside you're shaking. Because now, more than ever, you understand the danger. Sometimes the rules aren't meant to keep you safe. They're meant to keep them safe, to make sure you die politely. You glance at your soup bowl. You didn't finish it. You remember the flavour, bland, slightly metallic. You wonder now if that was just poor seasoning, or something more. No one will ask questions. Culldin was old, they'll say. Or he had a weak constitution. Or he offended someone, and the kitchen simply misunderstood the instruction. You think of the Queen. She hasn't eaten all night. She rarely does. Because the most powerful person at the table is often the one who doesn't eat at all. Later, in the quiet corridors, you hear whispers, servants muttering about. Someone struggle without making it your obligation to solve. You can support someone without absorbing their emotions as your own. This distinction is difficult to internalize when you've spent your whole life believing that caring means carrying, that love means self-sacrifice, that being good means managing everyone else's emotional experience. But learning this difference is essential, because compassion is sustainable. Compassion nourishes both people. Responsibility, on the other hand, depletes you while preventing the other person from developing their own emotional resources. One creates healthy relationships, the other creates exhaustion and resentment. Compassion involves witnessing someone's experience without taking it on as your own. It means being present with them in their difficulty without feeling compelled to fix it. It means offering support when asked while trusting their capacity to handle their own emotions. Compassion recognizes that people are resilient, that they can work through their own struggles, that they sometimes need to feel difficult emotions as part of their growth and healing. Compassion holds space without taking over that space. It accompanies without directing. It supports without controlling. Responsibility, on the other hand, operates from a different place. It assumes that the other person can't handle their emotions without your intervention. It assumes that their discomfort is your problem to solve. It assumes that if you don't step in, they won't be okay. This assumption, while it feels like caring, is actually disempowering. It communicates that you don't trust their capacity, that you believe they need you to manage their emotional experience, that they can't be trusted to work through their own difficulties. And while this might come from a place of genuine care, it ultimately keeps both people stuck in an unhealthy dynamic. The shift from responsibility to compassion requires letting go of control, letting go of the belief that you can or should manage other people's emotional lives, letting go of the need to fix, to solve, to make everything okay. This is terrifying when you've spent your whole life believing that managing everyone's emotions is what keeps you safe, valued, needed. But it's also liberating, because when you release responsibility, when you move into compassion, you get to simply be with people rather than constantly working to change their emotional state. You get to offer your presence rather than your problem solving. You get to trust in their resilience rather than assuming their fragility. This distinction also protects your own well-being. Compassion allows you to care deeply without depleting yourself. You can feel empathy for someone's struggle without taking that struggle into your own body, your own mind, your own emotional system. You can support them without sacrificing yourself. You can be there for them without abandoning yourself. This creates a sustainable way of caring that doesn't lead to exhaustion or resentment. Because you're offering what you can genuinely give, your presence, your support, your witnessing, without taking on what isn't yours to carry, their emotions, their problems, their responsibility for their own healing. Learning to practice compassion instead of responsibility requires retraining yourself in how you show up in relationships. It requires practicing phrases like, "I'm here with you," instead of, "Let me fix this." It requires asking, "How can I support you?" and then actually listening to their answer rather than assuming you know what they need. It requires sitting with the discomfort of not fixing, not solving, not making everything better. It requires trusting that people can handle their own emotions, that they'll ask for specific support if they need it, that your job is to be present and caring, not to take over and manage. This feels unnatural at first because it goes against everything you've practiced. But over time, as you experience the relief of not carrying everyone's emotional weight, as you notice that people are actually okay even when you don't fix their problems, as you feel the sustainability of compassion versus the depletion of responsibility, the distinction becomes clearer and more embodied, and you learn that you can care deeply, love fully, support genuinely without taking responsibility for everyone's happiness. That compassion, real compassion, is actually more loving than taking over ever was, because it honours both people's autonomy, their humanity, their capacity, and that's the foundation for healthy, sustainable, mutual relationships. There comes a moment, often unexpected, when something shifts. Maybe it's burnout so complete you can't function anymore. Maybe it's a betrayal by someone you've given everything to. Maybe it's watching someone you love struggle with the same pattern. Maybe it's just exhaustion so deep that you can't maintain the facade any longer. Whatever the catalyst, something cracks open. And for the first time, you start to question the story you've been living. The story that your worth depends on keeping everyone happy. That your job is to manage everyone's emotions. That your needs matter less than others' comfort. This awakening isn't comfortable. It's actually quite painful. Because it means seeing how much you've been giving away, how little you've been receiving, how unbalanced your relationships have become, how much of yourself you've lost in service of others. But this discomfort is also the beginning of change. It's the first moment where you're not just continuing the pattern unconsciously. You're seeing it, naming it, recognizing it as a pattern rather than as truth. And seeing it means you finally have the option to choose something different. This moment of awakening doesn't arrive the same way for everyone. For some, it's a sudden crisis, a health scare that forces you to recognize you've been running yourself into the ground. A relationship ending because you finally couldn't give anymore. A breakdown where the exhaustion becomes so overwhelming that you simply can't keep going. These crisis moments are jarring, painful, but they're also clarifying. They force you to see what you've been doing to yourself. They create an opening where change becomes not just possible, but necessary. For others, the awakening is more gradual. It's a slow accumulation of small moments where you notice something's wrong. You're tired all the time and you don't know why. You feel resentful but you can't quite pinpoint why. You feel lonely despite being surrounded by people. You feel like something's missing but you can't name what it is. These small observations accumulate until they reach a threshold where you can't ignore them anymore. Where you finally have to confront the pattern, the cost, the imbalance. Where you finally have to admit that the way you've been living isn't working, isn't sustainable, isn't making you happy despite all your efforts to make everyone else happy. The awakening often involves recognizing the inequality in your relationships, seeing clearly, maybe for the first time, how much more you give than you receive, how much more you support than you're supported, how much more you accommodate than you're accommodated, how much more emotional labor you perform than anyone performs for you. This recognition can be painful. It can feel like betrayal, though often it's not that anyone deliberately took advantage. They simply responded to what you offered, to the dynamic you created, to the role you took on. But regardless of intent, the result is the same. You've been giving far more than you've been receiving, and that imbalance has been costing you. Part of the awakening is also recognizing your own participation in the pattern. This isn't about blame, it's about recognizing that you had a role in creating these dynamics, that you chose to overfunction, to take on responsibility for everyone's emotions, to suppress your needs, to prioritize everyone else. Understanding your role doesn't mean it's your fault. The patterns came from somewhere. They were learned. They served a purpose at one time. But recognizing your participation means recognizing your power. If you helped create these dynamics, you also have the power to change them. You're not a passive victim of your relationships. You're an active participant. And that means you can make different choices going forward. The awakening also involves grief. Grief for all the time you spent taking care of everyone else while neglecting yourself. Grief for the relationships that were never truly reciprocal. Grief for the self you lost in trying to be what everyone needed. Grief for the exhaustion you've been carrying for so long. Grief for the childhood where you learned these patterns. Grief for all of it. This grief is essential. It's the emotional processing of what you've been through. It's the acknowledgement that things weren't okay, even if you've been pretending they were. It's the recognition that you deserved better, that you still deserve better. Allowing this grief, sitting with it, moving through it, that's part of the awakening. Because you can't change what you haven't fully seen and felt. But alongside the grief is also something else: hope. The recognition that change is possible, that you don't have to keep living this way, that there's another option, that you can learn to set boundaries, to express needs, to prioritize yourself, to build reciprocal relationships, that you can release responsibility for everyone else's happiness and focus on your own, that you can heal these patterns, that you can become someone different while still honoring the caring, compassionate person you've always been. This hope is tentative at first, fragile, because you don't quite know how to be different yet, but it's there, a small flame of possibility, the beginning of something new. When you finally begin to see the weight you've been holding, when you start to recognize how much emotional responsibility you've taken on that was never yours to carry, grief arrives. Real, deep, complicated grief. Grief for the childhood where you had to be the adult. Grief for the relationships where you gave everything and received scraps. Grief for the years you spent believing your worth was tied to other people's happiness. Grief for the self you lost while taking care of everyone else. Grief for the exhaustion you've been carrying alone. Grief for the needs you suppressed, the feelings you ignored, the dreams you postponed or abandoned. This grief is necessary. It's not self-pity, it's acknowledgement. It's the emotional process of recognizing what you've been through, what you've survived, what you've endured, and allowing yourself to feel sad about it, angry about it, hurt by it. Because you deserved better. You deserved relationships where care was reciprocal. You deserved to have your needs matter as much as anyone else's. You deserved to be a child when you were a child. You deserved to develop a self separate from your usefulness to others. This grief has layers. The first layer is grieving your childhood, if that's where these patterns began. Grieving the fact that you had to grow up too fast, that you had to take care of adults when you should have been taken care of. Grieving the emotional burden you carried that no child should carry. Grieving the fact that your needs were treated as problems, that your emotions were too much, that you learned to make yourself small to make others comfortable. This isn't about blaming your parents or caregivers. Many of them were doing the best they could with what they had. But that doesn't change the impact on you. That doesn't change the fact that you deserved a different experience, that you deserve to be a child without the weight of adult responsibilities. Another layer is grieving the relationships. You've poured yourself into that never truly nourished you. The friendships where you were always the listener, never the one being listened to. The romantic relationships where you were always the caretaker, never the one being cared for. The family dynamics where you were always the peacekeeper, never the one whose needs came first. These relationships might have had good moments, genuine connection, real care, but they were also fundamentally imbalanced. And recognizing that imbalance, feeling the hurt of it, grieving the fact that you deserved mutuality and didn't receive it, that's important. Not to hold resentment, but to honor your experience, to validate that yes, it was hard, yes, it was unfair, yes, you deserved better. There's also grief for the self you lost, the person you might have been if you hadn't spent your whole life managing everyone else's emotions, the dreams you might have pursued if you'd prioritized your own goals, the boundaries you might have set if you'd believed your needs mattered, the peace you might have felt if you'd released the burden of responsibility for everyone's happiness. Who would you be if you'd spent the same energy on yourself that you spent on everyone else? This is an impossible question to answer, but it's worth asking, worth grieving, because there's a cost to living the way you've lived, and that cost was paid by your own potential, your own well-being, your own development. You gave so much to others that there wasn't much left for you, and that's something to grieve. The grief also includes mourning the years of exhaustion, the chronic depletion, the constant vigilance, the never-ending emotional labour, the weight of carrying everyone's feelings, the loneliness of being everyone's support but having no support yourself, the physical toll on your body, the mental toll on your peace, all of those years of pushing through, overriding your own needs, functioning on empty. That was real. It happened. It cost you. And it's okay to feel sad about that, to feel angry about that, to wish it had been different, to grieve the toll it took and continues to take. This grief process isn't linear. It comes in waves. You might think you've processed it, and then something will trigger it again, and the sadness will wash over you fresh and raw. That's normal. That's how grief works. It needs to be felt repeatedly, from different angles, in different contexts, until it finally begins to integrate, until the pain becomes less sharp, until you can look at your history with compassion rather than just hurt, until you can see what you survived and feel proud of your resilience rather than just sad about what you endured. And here's what's important. This grief isn't self-pity. It's not wallowing. It's not being overdramatic. It's honoring your experience. It's giving yourself permission to feel the feelings you've been suppressing for years while you took care of everyone else. It's finally turning toward yourself with the same compassion you've shown others. It's saying what you went through was hard. What you've been carrying is heavy. You deserved better, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. This self-compassion, this grieving of your own experience, is healing. It's the beginning of reclaiming yourself, of recognizing your worth, of understanding that you matter, not just as someone who serves others, but as a person deserving of care, consideration, and kindness. The grief hurts, but it's also freeing, because on the other side of grief is acceptance, and on the other side of acceptance is the possibility of change. One of the most revolutionary realizations in your healing is this simple truth. Other people can handle their own emotions. They don't need you to manage, fix, or prevent their discomfort. Adults are capable of sitting with sadness, working through anger, processing disappointment. They don't need you to rescue them from their own emotional experiences. This sounds obvious, but for someone who has spent their life believing otherwise, it's actually shocking. Because if people can handle their own emotions, then what's your role? If you're not responsible for keeping everyone okay, then what are you responsible for? This question can feel destabilizing, because your entire identity has been built around emotional caretaking. But here's what emerges once that identity begins to shift. You discover that your value isn't in what you do for others. Your value is inherent. You discover that people don't actually need you to fix them. They need you to witness them, to validate them, to be present with them. You discover that the most loving thing you can do is sometimes to let people have their own emotional experiences without interference, to trust their capacity, to believe in their resilience, to stop treating them as fragile beings who can't survive without your constant intervention. This realization challenges everything you've believed about love and care. You've believed that caring means preventing people from feeling difficult emotions, that love means protecting people from pain, that being supportive means solving problems, but actually true support often means stepping back, allowing people their process, trusting that they have the resources to handle what they're facing, offering presence without taking over. This is hard to internalize because it goes against your instinct, your conditioning, your entire way of relating to people. Learning that people can handle their own emotions requires observing what happens when you don't step in, when you resist the urge to fix, to solve, to make better. And often what you discover is surprising. People work through things. They find solutions, they process their emotions, they reach out for support when they need it. They're more capable than you gave them credit for. This isn't to say people don't need support, they do. But support is different from taking over. Support is saying, I'm here if you need me. I believe in your ability to handle this. How can I best help? It's responding to their requests rather than assuming you know what they need. It's trusting their agency rather than assuming their helplessness. This also means recognizing that people's emotions are information for them, not problems for you. When someone is sad, that sadness is telling them something. Maybe about what they value, what they've lost, what they need. When someone is angry, that anger is showing them where their boundaries are being violated. When someone is anxious, that anxiety is pointing to something they care about. These emotions have purpose. They're not just inconveniences to be eliminated. And when you rush in to fix, to make the emotion go away, you're actually interfering with their emotional process. You're preventing them from learning what their emotions are trying to teach them. Trusting people's capacity to handle their emotions also means accepting that sometimes people will make choices you disagree with. They'll stay in situations you think they should leave. They'll handle things differently than you would. They'll make mistakes. And your job is not to prevent any of that. Your job is to be present, to offer perspective if asked, to support them in their choices even when you don't agree. This requires enormous trust and letting go. Trust that people have reasons for their choices even if you don't understand them. Trust that people will learn from their experiences, even difficult ones. Trust that people's paths are their own to walk, not yours to control. This doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It doesn't mean not caring. It means caring in a healthier way. It means offering companionship instead of management, presence instead of control, trust instead of rescue. And often, this kind of support is actually more valuable than all the fixing you've been doing, because it communicates faith in the person's capacity. It honours their autonomy. It treats them as competent adults rather than as fragile beings who need constant protection. And this allows them to develop their own emotional resilience, their own problem-solving skills, their own capacity to handle difficulty, which ultimately serves them far better than your constant intervention ever could. Differentiation is a psychological concept that might change your life. It's the ability to be intimately connected with someone while remaining emotionally separate from them, to care deeply about their experience without absorbing it as your own, to be present with their emotions without feeling responsible for changing them, to maintain your own sense of self while being in relationship. This is what you've been missing, not because you're broken, but because you never learned it. You learned fusion instead, complete merger with others' emotional states. But differentiation offers something different, the possibility of connection without losing yourself, of intimacy without enmeshment, of care without depletion. Learning differentiation means practicing small acts of emotional separation, noticing when someone else's mood is triggering your anxiety and consciously reminding yourself, that's their experience, not mine. Observing when you're about to take responsibility for someone else's happiness and pausing to ask, is this actually my responsibility? It means building a stronger sense of where you end and others begin, creating clear boundaries between your emotional experience and theirs. This doesn't make you cold or uncaring, it makes you healthier, it makes your relationships more sustainable, it makes love possible without self-erasure. Differentiation is a concept from family systems theory, particularly from the work of Murray Bowen, and it describes the ability to maintain a solid sense of self within relationships. It's the capacity to have your own thoughts, feelings, and values while still being emotionally connected to others. People with strong differentiation can be in intense relationships without losing themselves. They can care deeply without becoming overwhelmed. They can be influenced by others without being controlled by others' emotions. They can choose closeness when they want it, and distance when they need it, without either choice being driven by anxiety. For someone who feels responsible for everyone's happiness, differentiation is often very low. You don't have a clear sense of where you end and others begin. Their emotions become your emotions. Their problems become your problems. Their happiness becomes your responsibility. You can't maintain your own sense of self when you're in relationship because you're constantly adapting to others, merging with their emotional states, losing your boundaries in the process. This creates relationships that feel overwhelming, depleting, anxiety-producing. Because you can't be in relationship without disappearing. Learning differentiation requires developing what Bowen called a solid self. This is the part of you that remains stable regardless of what's happening around you. It's your core values, your sense of identity, your emotional center that doesn't change based on others' reactions to you. When someone is upset, your solid self remains calm. When someone is disappointed, your solid self doesn't collapse. When someone needs something, your solid self considers whether you want to give it rather than automatically complying. This solid self is built gradually through practice, through consistently choosing to honor your own experience even when others want you to do something different. Practicing differentiation in daily life looks like noticing the moments when you're merging with someone else's emotions and consciously separating. Your partner has a bad day at work and comes home in a mood. Your old pattern is to absorb that mood, to feel responsible for fixing it, to become anxious if they stay upset. Differentiation means recognizing they're having a difficult day, that's their experience. I can be supportive without taking on their emotion as my own. I can maintain my own emotional state while being present for them. This doesn't mean being cold or dismissive. It means being a separate person who cares rather than a merged person who absorbs. Another practice is separating your choices from others' reactions. Maybe you need to set a boundary, and you know the other person will be disappointed. Your old pattern is to avoid the boundary because you can't tolerate their disappointment. Differentiation means recognizing, I need this boundary for my own well-being, They may be disappointed, and that's okay. Their disappointment is their emotional experience to process, not my problem to fix by abandoning my boundary. This allows you to make choices based on what's right for you, rather than based on managing others' reactions. Differentiation also involves having your own opinions, preferences, and desires, even when they differ from those around you. It means being able to say, "I see it differently," without anxiety. It means being able to want something different without feeling selfish. It means being able to prioritize yourself sometimes without guilt. All of this requires a strong sense of self that isn't dependent on constant approval or agreement from others. That can tolerate difference, conflict, disappointment without collapsing or sacrificing itself to restore harmony. The challenge with developing differentiation when you've spent your life being undifferentiated is that it feels wrong at first. Maintaining your own emotional state when someone else is upset feels cold. Having your own opinions when they differ from others feels confrontational. Prioritizing your needs feels selfish. All your conditioning tells you that good people merge, accommodate, sacrifice themselves. So differentiation, healthy as it is, triggers guilt and anxiety. This is normal. It's your nervous system reacting to something unfamiliar. But with practice, as you experience the benefits of differentiation, as you notice that relationships can actually be more intimate when both people are separate selves, as you feel the relief of not carrying everyone's emotions, differentiation starts to feel more natural, more sustainable, more like love than the enmeshed pattern ever was. As you heal, you begin to understand what healthy relationships actually look like. They're not one person constantly giving while the other constantly receives. They're not built on one person managing all the emotional labor while the other remains unaware. Healthy relationships are reciprocal. Both people give, both people receive, both people show up, both people take responsibility for their own emotions while offering support when needed. Both people have needs that matter, both people set boundaries, both people grow. This might mean some of your current relationships need to change, not necessarily end, but shift. You'll need to stop over-functioning. You'll need to start expressing needs. You'll need to set boundaries. You'll need to let people experience the natural consequences of their choices, rather than constantly rescuing them. Some people will adjust. They'll rise to meet you in a healthier dynamic. They'll appreciate the more authentic, balanced relationship. But some people won't. They'll resist the change. They'll call you selfish. They'll pressure you to go back to the old dynamic. And that's information. It tells you who was in relationship with your authentic self versus who was in relationship with what you could do for them. The relationships that survive this shift are the ones worth keeping. The ones built on genuine mutual care rather than on your willingness to deplete yourself. Building reciprocal relationships starts with recognizing what reciprocity actually means. It doesn't mean perfect equality where you're tracking who did what and keeping score. It means a general balance over time where both people contribute to the relationship, both people feel cared for, both people's needs are considered important. It means that care flows both ways, that emotional labor is shared, that support is mutual, that neither person is consistently in the role of giver while the other is consistently in the role of receiver. Shifting toward a reciprocity in existing relationships requires communication and boundary setting. You need to start expressing your needs clearly, not apologetically, not with extensive justification, just clearly. I need support with this. I need you to listen right now. I need us to share this responsibility. You need to stop over-functioning. Stop doing things for people that they can do for themselves. Stop managing emotions that aren't yours to manage. Stop taking on responsibilities that should be shared. This will feel uncomfortable. People might be confused. They're used to you handling things. But if you want relationships to become more balanced, you need to create space for others to step up. You also need to observe how people respond to your needs and boundaries. Do they rise to meet you? Do they adjust their behavior? Do they show care and consideration for what you're expressing? Or do they resist? Do they minimize your needs? Do they make you feel guilty for asking? Do they continue expecting you to overfunction while they underfunction? This tells you important information about the relationship, about whether it has potential for healthy reciprocity or whether it's built on your willingness to accept imbalance. For new relationships, building reciprocity from the start means showing up differently than you have in the past. It means not immediately taking on the caretaker role. It means expressing needs early rather than waiting until you're resentful. It means paying attention to whether the other person gives as well as receives. It means being willing to walk away from relationships that show signs of becoming one-sided. This requires awareness and boundary setting from the beginning, rather than falling into old patterns and trying to change them later. Reciprocal relationships feel different than what you're used to. They feel more balanced, more sustainable, less exhausting. You don't feel perpetually drained. You don't feel resentful. You don't feel taken for granted. Instead, you feel valued for who you are, not just for what you do. You feel like your needs matter. You feel like the relationship nourishes you as much as you nourish it. This might be unfamiliar. It might even feel slightly uncomfortable at first because you're so used to the imbalanced dynamic, but it's healthy. It's what relationships should feel like. And once you experience it, once you know what reciprocity feels like, it becomes much harder to accept the old imbalance patterns. You develop standards. You recognize what you deserve. And you become less willing to settle for relationships that require you to abandon yourself. The relationships that can become reciprocal, the ones where people adjust and meet you in healthier dynamics, those are the ones worth investing in. They show you that the relationship was always about genuine connection, and the imbalance was just a pattern that could be changed, not the foundation of the relationship, but the relationships that can't adjust, where people actively resist your needs and boundaries, where they want you to return to your caretaking role. Those are the ones you may need to release. Not with anger or blame, but with the understanding that the relationship wasn't serving you, wasn't honoring you, wasn't built on the kind of mutual care you deserve. And releasing those relationships, painful as it might be, creates space for relationships that will honor you, support you, and value you as a whole person with your own needs and worth. Eventually, if you keep doing the work, you reach a place that feels almost miraculous. A place where you can witness someone's unhappiness without automatically trying to fix it. Where you can set a boundary without drowning in guilt. Where you can say no without extensive justification. Where you can prioritize your own needs without believing you're being selfish. Where you can be in relationship without losing yourself. Where you can care deeply without carrying everyone's emotional weight. This freedom is quiet. It's not dramatic. You don't wake up one day suddenly transformed. It comes in small moments. The moment you let someone be upset without rushing to make it better. The moment you express a need clearly and directly. The moment you recognize someone else's problem as theirs to solve, not yours. The moment you feel sad or tired and allow yourself to rest rather than pushing through to take care of others. These moments accumulate. They become a new way of being. A way where your compassion remains intact but your boundaries are firm. Where your kindness continues but your self-preservation matters too. Where your care for others coexists with care for yourself. And in this space you finally understand. You were never responsible for everyone's happiness. You were only ever responsible for your own integrity, your own growth, your own well-being. Everything else was a burden you chose to carry because you didn't know you had permission to put it down. This freedom shows up in unexpected ways, in the ease you feel in social situations because you're not constantly monitoring everyone's emotional states, in the energy you have because you're not depleting yourself through constant caretaking, in the peace you feel because you're not carrying the weight of everyone's problems, in the authenticity you can bring to relationships because you're showing up as yourself rather than as a carefully curated version designed to keep everyone comfortable, in the joy you experience in small moments because you're actually present rather than constantly scanning for who needs what. The freedom also shows up in your relationships. Some relationships deepen because they can finally become reciprocal. The people who truly care about you step up, show up, meet you in mutual support. These relationships become richer, more authentic, more satisfying because they're no longer built on your self-sacrifice. Other relationships fall away, and while that might be sad, it's also clarifying. Those were relationships built on your role, not on your authentic self, and releasing them makes space for relationships that honor all of you. You start to notice that you're making different choices. You're saying no more often, and it doesn't feel like the end of the world. You're expressing preferences, and people actually want to know what you want. You're asking for help, and people are willing to give it. You're showing your struggles, and people don't run away. All the things you feared would happen if you stopped being the caretaker, if you stopped taking responsibility for everyone's happiness, they don't happen. Or if they do happen with some people, you realize those aren't your people. That you're okay without relationships that require you to be less than fully yourself. The freedom includes freedom from the anxiety that has lived with you for so long. The constant worry about whether everyone is okay, the hypervigilance scanning for signs of distress, the immediate spike of panic when someone seems upset. As you release responsibility for everyone's emotions, as you learn that people can handle their own experiences, as you practice differentiation and boundaries, this anxiety begins to quiet. It doesn't disappear entirely. You still care. You still notice when people are struggling, but it doesn't consume you. It doesn't compel you to immediate action. It doesn't make you feel like you're in danger if someone is uncomfortable. There's also freedom in finally knowing yourself. After years of being so attuned to everyone else that you lost touch with your own inner world, you're reconnecting with yourself. You're rediscovering what you like, what you want, what you need, what you value. You're rebuilding a sense of self that's independent of your usefulness to others. You're becoming someone who exists not just in relation to others, but as a full person with your own life, your own goals, your own worth. This self-knowledge is grounding. It gives you something solid to stand on when relationships get challenging. It reminds you that you're a whole person deserving of care and consideration. And perhaps the most profound freedom is the freedom to love without losing yourself, to care deeply without depleting yourself, to be compassionate without taking on others' burdens, to be in intimate relationships while maintaining your own boundaries, to give generously without giving everything. This is what healthy love looks like. Not the self-sacrificing, boundaryless, exhausting love you practiced before, but a love that honors both people, a love that's sustainable, a love that nourishes rather than depletes, a love where you can be fully yourself while being fully with another. This is the love you deserved all along, and now, finally, you're free to experience it. And so you've traveled through this landscape tonight, through the quiet territory of your own patterns, your own protection, your own conditioning. You've looked at the ways you learned to take on everyone's emotional weight, and you're beginning to see that this wasn't a character flaw, but an adaptation, an intelligence, a way of surviving in environments that needed you to be more than a child should have to be, more self-sufficient than anyone should have to be, more attuned to others' needs than to your own. You learned these patterns because you needed to, because they kept you safe in situations where safety felt precarious, because they gave you value in relationships where value felt conditional, because they helped you navigate a world that didn't always know how to hold you, see you, meet you where you were. But you're not in that world anymore. You're here now. You're an adult with choices, with agency, with the capacity to examine these patterns and decide which ones still serve you and which ones are costing more than they're worth. And what you're discovering, perhaps for the first time, is that you don't have to keep carrying everyone else's happiness to be worthy of love. You don't have to keep monitoring everyone's emotions to be safe. You don't have to keep sacrificing yourself to be valued. These were survival strategies, and they worked for a time. But survival is not the same as flourishing, and you deserve to flourish. You deserve relationships where care flows both ways, where your needs matter as much as anyone else's, where you can show up as your full self, including the parts that struggle, that need, that sometimes don't have it all together, where you're valued, not for what you do, but for who you are, where you can rest without guilt, where you can set boundaries without shame, where you can prioritize yourself without being called selfish. These aren't unreasonable things to want. These are basic elements of healthy relationships, and you deserve them. You're not broken for feeling responsible for everyone's happiness. You're not damaged for caring so deeply. You're not weak for carrying so much for so long. You're human. You're someone who learned to attune to others' needs because that was what your environment required. You're someone with enormous capacity for empathy, for love, for care. And now you're learning that you can keep all of that compassion while also extending it toward yourself. You can care for others while also caring for yourself. You can be supportive while also being supported. You can give while also receiving. This isn't selfish. It's balanced. It's healthy. It's sustainable. The journey toward releasing this pattern, toward building reciprocal relationships, toward reclaiming yourself, it's not linear. There will be moments when you fall back into old habits, when someone's distress triggers your old instinct to fix, when guilt tries to pull you back into overfunctioning, when fear tells you that setting boundaries means losing love. These moments don't mean you're failing. They mean you're human. They mean you're learning something new, and learning takes practice, takes time, takes patience with yourself. What matters is that you notice these moments, that you recognize the old pattern when it shows up, that you have compassion for yourself in the struggle, that you choose differently when you can, and slowly, over time, the new patterns become more natural, the boundaries become easier, the self-prioritization becomes less guilt-inducing, the reciprocal relationships become the norm rather than the exception. And tonight, right now, you can let all of this settle softly, like snow falling on quiet ground. You can release the burden of fixing, managing, controlling everyone else's emotional experience. You can release the belief that your worth is tied to keeping everyone happy. You can release the guilt about having needs. You can release the fear that prioritizing yourself makes you selfish. You can release all of it just for tonight, just for this moment, because tonight you don't have to be responsible for anyone's happiness except your own. And your happiness tonight is rest, is peace, is letting go of what you've been carrying, is allowing yourself to simply be here, breathing, existing, without having to manage or monitor or fix anything at all. You are enough, exactly as you are, not because of what you do for others, but because you exist. Your worth is inherent, not earned. Your needs are valid, not burdensome. Your boundaries are necessary, not selfish. Your rest is essential, not optional. You matter. Your well-being matters. Your happiness matters. And you don't have to sacrifice yourself to deserve love. You deserve love simply by being human, by being you, imperfect and real and worthy exactly as you are. So let yourself drift now. Let yourself soften into sleep. Let the weight you've been carrying dissolve into the darkness. Let your body relax, your mind quiet, your heart rest. You've done enough. You've given enough. You've carried enough. Tonight, you can simply be. Simply rest. Simply exist without the burden of responsibility for anyone else's emotional world. You're safe here. You're held. You can let go. You can sleep. You can rest in the knowing that you are worthy. You are enough. You are deserving of all the care and compassion you've given to everyone else. Sweet dreams.